the first thing I want to do is to show you the various components or the elements, or I call them colors, but they're effectively the movies that I've created over the years and that I felt in some way might be important to have and to utilize in the motion painting. And as you can see from the screen here, I've got a whole bunch of things, some of which, for example, this little segment here that I've done, I call it After Wesselman. That was created in Adobe Flash with tweening process. And as you can see that I've got on this 50 elements here. This is, I thought maybe that I might use some of my older paintings. This I did in the 1970s, I think 71 or 72, on oil on canvas with plastic and paint on top, and this is another Flash animation that I've done. I've done a lot of these things in Flash that at some point in time I thought, I'm not sure if I was going to use it or not, but at some point in time I thought I might use, and I'm not sure, I don't know why I selected those as opposed to several hundred others that I've done over the years. But you can see also that I've got a lot of projects that I've created in After Effects. First, I want you to be aware that this is not how-to video. I'm not going to show you how to use After Effects or Adobe Premiere. I just want to give you a very quick cursory sense of the elements that I've used in my projects and some of the steps that I've gone through, discarded various directions that I've gone in, and then finally selected the components that I've used to create this Mamonet motion painting. So I will first, before I go into After Effects, I want to show you some of the key elements that I felt might be more interesting to use in a movie. And this one, for example, that's a photograph that I brought into the iPad and then processed with this software. I have 2 or 3 in the iPad that I use that you can manipulate and change depending on what you do with the settings. It'll bring in various processes and colors. And so I think this is one of the ones that I've used in the motion painting. This is an element that I used, and you'll see later on, it was created in Art Rage. It's a painting that I did that I recorded as a script, i.e. it records the process of doing the painting. And I'm always looking for interesting combinations. I try to avoid goals or concepts so that I'm not locked into a certain direction, except for the fact that I like combinations that give me surprises and that break illustration, that break an illustrative approach to art making. So this was one of the elements that I thought might be interesting. This one is, and you'll see later on, that this combines various elements. It has, most of these are combinations of still images. The one on the right here is an image of a painting that I did in Art Rage of the pond, where I was spending a couple of days at my brother's summer camp, and I did a drawing of the lake at the camp, because it sits right on a lake. And I'll go over that a little bit later on, but suffice it to say that that's an element that I think essentially I stayed with. These are all of the, or not all, but some of the movies that I felt might be interesting to use. They are elements that I use in the composition that I bring into After Effects. This is a still of lines. Here's another one in the same software that manipulates colors and abstract forms that I considered using. Here's another one. But it's a very uncontrolled process. It gives you, the computer crunches numbers and gives you color forms that may or may not be useful. Or you can designate, you can control to some extent the output, but essentially it's free form. Here's another one. But you get the idea here. I don't think I have to go through all of this. Here's a more interesting one visually that is using the same software in the iPad and allows me to create color forms that I think I ended up using this in the Mamonet final result. Okay, so anyway, these are the elements. I want to show you a couple of others. This one is a combination of elements that I used in the After Effects composition, the project. You can see that this has the drawing that I did on the iPad of the lake at the end. It also has a still image of oil paint, as well as the hooks said a little video I did while my wife and I were on vacation many years ago in the south of France. So that's one iteration of Mamonet, which I wanted to use. Here's another one, a variation. And the sound you're hearing, if you can hear this, is the sound of my oil heater in the studio. So it was a random sound happenstance that I ended up using. This is one of the projects that I got a little bit closer to the final result, which included some of the elements that you've seen. And they are manipulated in through various filters. This is another version, an earlier version really of the Mamonet painting. This is the same thing, but with a slightly different effect. The same one here with a different effect. This is, again, this version you can see incorporates the iPad drawing and painting of the paint, the white paint of the self-portrait, and it has as well these little disturbances, the little green insects, bugs, or whatever they are there that are coming, that have been incorporated in the painting. I had tried later on a triptych of this. In a way, it's interesting to note that the repetition or cloning, which is an interesting concept in and of itself, cloning artwork, or repetition to see what variations can occur that may make the piece a little less, what's the word, dogmatic, maybe a little bit less, or maybe a little more interesting, maybe a little more incongruous. This is another triptych motion painting of the piece. Ultimately, I ended up discarding this triptych because I didn't find it really that interesting. I want to go back to the squiggles here, and these are the squiggles that I had created in a free software called Processing. And what happens is that in that patch, or in that processing example, every time you touch the screen, you create little animations. And I thought that might be interesting to use. So that's really the basic animation that I created. And then I brought it into After Effects, changed the color on it. I'll get into that a little bit later on. This is the hook cell, or part of the hook cell, inverted video that I ended up using in Mamonet. I'm not sure how interesting any of this is to you, but I thought I would go over and show you some of the elements that I felt ultimately belonged in the Mamonet motion painting. Okay, so I think now I've given you a sense of the movies that I've used or considered using. I mean, I find these fascinating. It's a kind of interest in this process as something that could be incorporated in the work that I do, and at the same time, a kind of, I can't really say repulsion, but a kind of a disinterest in it, because in spite of the fact that it's interesting, it only stays at a certain level and never goes beyond it. But at any rate, there are aspects of this that I find really fascinating. This was light bouncing off my studio wall that gave me patterns that I think are interesting, but I didn't end up using it because the quality is so poor. This is another painting that I did that I thought maybe could be used. Again, I thought maybe I would use that. It's an animation. Incongruity, I think, is an element that I find really interesting. It's, I mean, part of the role that art has, I think, is to get away from routine and to introduce a fresh perspective, something that's not predicted, that can't be diagrammed or projected as a pattern that becomes stale. So the extent to which I can, this is a drawing of I had done in the 1960s of my wife many years ago that I thought I might use. A movie, I think this is pretty close to the final result, with the exception of maybe some more things going on. In the final painting. Another example of slightly modified Mamonet. You've seen this before. I thought that was interesting, but it could be another iteration of the Mamonet motion painting, but I ended up actually discarding that. More iterations of it. Again, this is one segment of the triptych that I ended up discarding, of this triptych here and various elements in it. Okay, so this concludes a review of some of the elements I assembled for possible use in creating the motion painting Mamonet. In this video, I mentioned that I assembled about 50 files before undertaking this painting, but in point of fact, it's closer to 90 files consisting of movies, stills, animations, and discarded motion paintings that I created along the way. In the next video, I'll go into some of the After Effects projects and describe some of the processes I used to arrive at the final Mamonet motion painting. Thank you for watching.